Virtue doesn't always don the guise of wickedness, yet frequently malevolence, cloaked in the semblance of righteousness, perpetrates its deranged acts. Ought we to have faith in those who surround us? Let's journey back 4 decades to the dawn of 1984, to the quaint borough of Falls, nestled in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This is where young Terri Brooks, a mere 5 years old, resided. Terri Lynn entered the world on September 13, 1958, born to George and Frances. She was the firstborn among 4 siblings. During Terri's adolescent years, her parents parted ways. It was an arduous period for the entire household, particularly for the youngsters. They had to acclimate to novel transformations in their lives, and the eldest daughter had to assume the role of a guide for her brothers and sisters. Terri was portrayed as an exceptionally joyful, exuberant, and outgoing young lady. She formed friendships effortlessly and possessed the ability to interact with others effectively. Upon completing high school, Terri pursued higher education and concurrently commenced employment as a server to assist her family in some capacity. It was this very occupation that ultimately became Terri's passion. The student resolved that she aspired to further her career in the culinary and dining sector. After serving as a waitress for a period, the young woman was able to showcase her finest attributes and secure a managerial role for herself. Her affability and loquaciousness were ideally suited for customer service, while her diligence and tenacity enabled her to oversee others and coordinate the operations of the entire establishment. A young man named Alfred Scott Keefe was employed as a chef in this eatery, and he and Terri developed a strong affection for one another. A romance quickly blossomed between them, culminating in an engagement. For Terri's loved ones, this was quite an unexpected development, but they concluded that if Terri was content, they would rejoice for her as well. The couple was deeply enamored with each other and envisioned spending the remainder of their lives together. They intended to wed in the summer of 1984. Terri was immensely thrilled about the forthcoming occasion. She eagerly anticipated shopping for bridal gowns and selecting attire for herself and her bridesmaids. Brooks' professional life was also progressing. The young woman secured a new position as a night supervisor at Roy Rogers' restaurant. Employees regarded her as an equitable and upright manager. If they devoted themselves wholeheartedly to their work and adhered to the established rules, there were no issues. But Terri didn't hesitate to deal firmly with indolent and undependable staff members. She could assert her authority. This was the responsibility of a manager. Terri had grown accustomed to working night shifts of the restaurant, and it had become a part of her regular routine. But on the evening of February 4th, 1984, something went awry, because for some inexplicable reason, she never returned home this time. Despite the fact that Terri and Scott were engaged, they maintained separate residences. The following morning, as Scott was driving by his fiancée's abode, he observed that her vehicle was absent from the driveway adjacent to the house. This struck him as peculiar, so he halted, exited his car, knocked on the door, and inquired with his future father-in-law about Terri's whereabouts. In tandem with George, they inspected the young woman's bedroom and deduced that she had not returned home the previous night. The distressed father seized the phone and contacted the Roy Rogers restaurant to ascertain if she was unharmed. However, the individual on the other end of the line corroborated the gravest apprehensions. Terri had vanished. She had departed from this world eternally. Around 6 a.m., one of the daytime supervisors of the same establishment arrived at work and made an utterly horrifying revelation. Upon entering the restaurant's kitchen, he stumbled upon the lifeless form of Terri Brooks. The young woman was sprawled in a pool of her own blood on the floor, with an enormous meat knife protruding from her neck, and her body was riddled with defensive wounds and contusions. Terri had been viciously assaulted and slain right at her place of employment. As soon as the manager discovered the body, he promptly dialed 911, and when George Brooks phoned the restaurant to inquire about his daughter's whereabouts, a law enforcement officer answered him and conveyed the tragic tidings. An autopsy was performed subsequently. The pathologist ascertained that the official cause of Terri's demise was likely strangulation. She had ceased breathing in a garbage bag placed over her head. Apparently, there was a vicious struggle between the young woman and the assailant, hence all the bruises. She also sustained a stab wound to the neck that only paralyzed her. She could no longer resist. Moreover, Terri was struck on the head multiple times against the concrete floor of the kitchen, which resulted in a cerebral hemorrhage. But even after all these dreadful injuries, the young woman was still alive. Perhaps she was lying unconscious when a plastic garbage bag was pulled over her head and fastened around Terri's head. Terri was still respiring when this occurred, as there was moisture inside the bag. Also at the scene, law enforcement noticed that Brooks's shoes were lying on the kitchen floor not far from where the body was. It was surmised that this is where the attack commenced. The young woman herself was wearing a winter coat. Therefore, everything transpired when she exited the restaurant in the evening to go home, approximately after midnight when the restaurant closed. There were no indications of breaking and entering, suggesting that Terri let the criminals in herself when she was departing through the front door. The police swiftly concluded that the night manager's death was most likely part of a robbery attempt. Approximately $2,500 was stolen from the safe in the office. Brooks's purse lying nearby was also emptied. Items were shaken out directly onto the floor, and the money was taken. Perhaps Terri knew the attacker or saw his face. Consequently, she was killed so that she would not alert the authorities and would be unable to identify the perpetrator. There was a spare exit in the restaurant that was closed for the night, but in the morning the manager and the police discovered that the window on the doors was shattered from the inside. Most likely, this is how the offender vacated the premises. Following the police, forensic experts arrived at the scene. They scrutinized the kitchen and restaurant hall for fingerprints and collected skin and hair samples from the body of the deceased, particularly from under her nails, to search for the perpetrator's DNA. However, all these events transpired in the mid-'80s, when comparative DNA analysis and forensic technologies were still in their nascent stages. Such evidence was not genuinely suitable for establishing the identity of the assailant. Nevertheless, the investigation into Terri Brooks's death commenced. The police interrogated and examined individuals connected to the deceased. Naturally, one of the first people they focused on was her fiancé, Scott Keith. When questioned about his whereabouts the previous night, the man responded that he was sleeping at home. Typically, Scott would meet his fiancée after her shift so that she wouldn't have to collect the revenue and close the restaurant building alone. But on that fateful evening, he had unfortunately retired early because he had an early shift the next morning. The guy felt remorseful about this. After all, if he had met Terri, she would be alive. This was the sole occasion he wasn't there, and his future wife desperately needed protection. In addition to conversing with Scott, the police also spoke with other close ones, who all unanimously stated that Terri did not and could not have enemies, as she was a kind and amiable person. But when investigators delved deeper into Terri's work activities and questioned her colleagues from the restaurant, new figures emerged in the case. Terri's subordinates mentioned one conflict in the workplace and named a guy who had a strong aversion to the girl. His name was Steve Daly. Steve formerly worked at the Roy Rogers restaurant as a chef, but due to his quick temper, the young man often lost his composure and caused a great deal of trouble for his colleagues. He obstinately refused to accept Terri as his boss and rejected all the rules she established. Because of him, the atmosphere in the team was unpleasant, which often affected the service of restaurant patrons. Terri was not going to disregard his attacks. Because Steve was creating problems in the workplace, the manager often confronted him about his behavior, but this only led to numerous arguments. During one of them, Daly even referred to Terri as a bitch. Therefore, ultimately he was terminated just a couple of weeks before the girl was brutally attacked. However, after that, Steve still visited the restaurant, ordered food, and tried in every possible way to anger Terri and even intimidate her. After conversing with the restaurant employees, the police had a serious contender for the role of the criminal. Most importantly, he had a compelling motive. Because of Terri, the guy lost his job. Maybe it was an act of revenge. Steve was summoned for questioning at the police station. He did not conceal the fact that he was genuinely furious with Terri. He absolutely disliked her. If she hadn't been a woman, he would have hit her once. However, the guy denied that he had dealt with his former boss. On the night of the incident, Daly tried to gain entry to a nightclub, but he was denied access. The police could not verify his story as they did not find any witnesses. It turned out that Steve did not have a sufficiently convincing alibi to be excluded from the list of suspects. Investigators asked the young man to take a polygraph test. He easily passed the lie detector test, which indicated to the police that he was being truthful. The police temporarily backed off from the guy, but in any case, they kept an eye on him. The police continued to check other employees of the Roy Rogers restaurant who were of interest to the investigation. In particular, they were interested in people who worked the same shift with Terri, and another suspect emerged. His fingerprint matched one of those found on the garbage bag placed over Terri's head, as well as on the window of the back door, from where the criminal allegedly fled. However, the employee had a logical explanation for why his prints were at the place where he worked. His responsibilities included collecting all the garbage in the evening, taking it out, and inserting a new bag into the bucket. So it's not surprising that his fingers left prints there. Unfortunately, there was no other evidence of this person's involvement in the attack. Moreover, the employees had a plausible alibi for that evening. All individuals somehow close to Terri were thoroughly checked and excluded from the list of suspects. Now, the police had a theory of an attack by a stranger with the aim of stealing funds from the establishment's cash register. Robberies of restaurants at that time were quite frequent in the surrounding areas. Of course, it did not come to the point of killing employees, but there were exceptions. About 2 weeks after Terri's death, another very similar attack occurred in another Roy Rogers restaurant. The assistant manager was leaving the establishment's restroom when someone assaulted him from behind, hit him on the head, and fled the scene. Nothing was stolen, and the police wondered if these two cases were connected. Fortunately, the assistant manager survived the attack, but the perpetrator was never found. A few days after that, there was another attack on a food service worker. This case occurred at an establishment in the city of Scranton, about 130 miles from Roy Rogers. In February 1984, a young woman named Kathy Hunchak was preparing to close the cafe in the evening. She had no idea that outside in the dark stood a man observing her actions. He was waiting for all the other employees to go home and for Kathy to be alone. This man intended to steal money from the cash registers. He did not take into account that all the revenue had already been put in the safe, and the girl did not have access to it. Instead of just leaving, the man took the cash from Kathy's wallet, and after that, he took the girl's life by stabbing her several times. Since the attack on Kathy occurred literally a couple of weeks after the death of Terri Brooks, detectives suspected that these cases could be related to each other because there were numerous similarities between them. Soon, the Scranton police made an arrest in the Kathy Hunchak case. The assailant turned out to be another cafe employee who decided to profit from his own workplace. As a result of further proceedings, this individual received a death sentence. After his arrest, he was interrogated by detectives leading the Terri Brooks case, but the man refused to talk to them at all and answer any questions. They still managed to obtain his fingerprints and compare them with those found at the crime scene, but none of the prints matched. The investigation reached an impasse. The police studied countless potential suspects, tracked down various leads, trying to link Terri's case to other incidents, but they simply suffered failure after failure. The detectives were never able to identify the person who committed this heinous crime. In the coming months, the case of the brutal attack on the night manager of the restaurant was placed on the shelf with unsolved cases. Gradually, it began to be forgotten due to the influx of new incidents that needed to be investigated. Terri Brooks died in her prime, and her killer was calmly walking free. For almost a decade and a half, there were no developments in Terri's case. Her grieving family was left without answers and without justice, which simply shattered their hearts. The year 1998 arrived, and a small glimmer of hope appeared in Terri's case. The Falls Police Department decided to retrieve their old unsolved cases from the archive and recheck some data using advancements in DNA and forensic technologies that had emerged over the years. One of these cases turned out to be the attack on Terri Brooks in 1984. All the evidence in this case was seized from storage and sent for forensic examination. This included the kitchen knife that was found protruding from the girl's neck and DNA samples taken from her body shortly after the discovery. Meanwhile, while all this evidence was being reanalyzed in the lab, new detectives who were assigned to the case began to recheck all the individuals who were in Terri's circle of communication. Her family, friends, colleagues, all underwent repeated interrogations in the hope that they would remember something important that they did not report in the mid-80s. This was done in case someone she knew actually attacked her. The injuries inflicted on the girl indicated this. According to the police, they were too personal in nature and were incredibly vicious. The attacker was clearly enraged with Terri. They also suggested that the person who took the girl's life that night had a much stronger motive than just stealing cash from the safe, and there was indeed a breakthrough in the case. When the new detectives spoke with Terri's former supervisor, they presented him with photos from the crime scene. He had not seen them before, as he was not shown the pictures during the initial investigation, and now he noticed several details that shattered the previous theory into pieces. It was a photograph from Terri's office. At the end of the work shift, the girl would arrange items on the table in a strictly established order. She would empty the ashtray and put all the stationery in the desk drawer. She was a very neat and organized individual. However, in the picture of the office taken that night, everything was different. The stationery was lying on the table, the ashtray was full, and the phone was not in its usual place. This information immediately caught the attention of the detectives. Previously, it was believed that the criminal attacked Terri when she was leaving the restaurant, but according to the testimony of the former supervisor, it turned out to be the opposite. She had not yet left the premises when she was attacked, since she had not completed her usual tasks. The disarray on the desk indicated that she indeed knew the attacker and led him into the restaurant that night. Consequently, this person was close enough to Terri that she was not afraid to stay with him alone in the building at night. That is why the police continued to investigate the close individuals in Terri's life. As part of this investigation, the detectives decided to speak with the girl's old friends, with whom the police for some reason did not talk during the first investigation in 1984. After these conversations, a new suspect suddenly emerged in the case, someone who had actually been in plain sight all these years. It turned out that shortly before her death, Terri confided in a friend that her relationship with her fiancé, Scott Keefe, was on the verge of breaking up. She was no longer certain if she truly wanted to marry him. Terri and Scott were not well acquainted when they announced their engagement. Initially, the girl was on cloud nine with happiness and could not wait for the wedding, but this happiness was short-lived because soon cracks began to appear in the relationship. Terri was quite ambitious and made every effort to climb the career ladder in the field of restaurant management. She was doing well at it. In contrast, Scott was the complete opposite. He was dissatisfied with his job as a chef in another restaurant, but he lacked the enthusiasm and motivation like Terri to pursue his dreams, and this made the guy very angry. In addition to everything, Scott was possessive and liked to control his fiancée. He needed to know where she was going, what she was doing, and who she was meeting with. That is why he would meet Terri every time after her night shift at the Roy Rogers restaurant. It was not at all for the girl's safety. The man was checking to see if there was anyone next to her. Obviously, she reached the point where she was tired of Scott's unfounded jealousy, his controlling and abusive behavior. She confessed to her friend that she was unsure if she wanted to go through with the wedding and be with Scott. This was completely new information for the police. In the old case files from 1984, there was nothing that would indicate these problems in their relationship because not everyone knew about it. The detectives leading the Brooks case thought of Scott as a loving and caring fiancé who adored Terri. Her family also really liked Keefe. At least that was the impression the police got. so neither the family of the deceased nor the police suspected the young man of anything. But now that new details of the case had come to light, Scott Keefe was first on the list. All this time, Keefe had been right in front of their eyes. Perhaps Terri told her fiancé about her doubts regarding the upcoming wedding, and he decided that if he couldn't have the girl himself, then she wouldn't belong to anyone. The problem was that the police currently had no solid evidence against Keefe to make an arrest. Fortunately, the answer came from the DNA samples taken from under Terri's fingernails when she was trying to protect her life. The DNA belonged to an unknown man who, according to the police, committed the brutal attack. The same unknown DNA profile was found on the knife sticking out of the girl's neck when she was discovered. Experts had to literally take the weapon apart. They removed the blade from the wooden handle and found particles belonging to the criminal underneath it. Now the police only had to compare the DNA of all the suspects with the obtained sample. And of course, the very first person they wanted to check was Scott Keefe. But if they asked him to provide a sample, the man could panic and go on the run. They didn't have enough evidence to arrest him, so they decided to obtain the DNA without his knowledge. At that time, Scott was still living with his parents. He had managed to get married, have a child, and get divorced again, returning to the family home. Scott was a heavy smoker. The detectives only had to find a cigarette butt, compare the DNA from the saliva, and identify a match. The police set up surveillance on Scott's house, and as soon as one of the owners took out the trash, they grabbed the bag and took it to the lab. Inside were cigarette butts that matched the DNA of the perpetrator. Now the police had solid evidence linking Scott Keefe to the brutal death of his fiancée. The man was taken to the police station for questioning but was not informed of the evidence found. His story about the events of that night was no different from the story of 1984. Therefore, he was offered to take a polygraph test, which he eventually failed. Only after that, a DNA sample was officially taken from him for analysis, confirming the detective's version of Scott's involvement in the death of his fiancée. Even before waiting for the test results, Keefe panicked and began to say strange things. Supposedly, he did not want it to happen and that she attacked him first. Apparently, his nerves were on edge. For 14 years, he lived in fear that the truth would one day come out. And now, when he realized that he was caught, his brain began to produce defensive phrases. When Scott realized that he had compromised himself, he tried to twist his words. But further police questioning forced him to confess to what he had done. When the man realized that his time was up and the police had evidence against him, he admitted what happened on that tragic night. On February 4th, 1984, after midnight, Scott went to the Roy Rogers restaurant where Terri was finishing her evening shift. Other employees of the establishment had already gone home, so no one saw him. The girl let her fiancé in while she was counting the revenue herself. Inside the restaurant, an argument erupted between them because Terri told Scott that she had canceled the wedding and no longer wanted to be with him. She did not like his possessive and domineering character, as well as his constant jealousy. This angered the guy so much that he hit the girl right in the face, after which rage completely consumed him. Terri tried to push him away and drive him out. A fierce struggle ensued between them in the kitchen. Keefe managed to knock his fiancée to the floor. He grabbed her by the shoulders and began hitting her head against the concrete floor, then wrapped his arms around her neck and squeezed with all his might. It is impossible to imagine what Terri felt at that moment when her once beloved person turned into an evil monster in a second, and as if in a test of strength, one of the knives fell from a chair next to them. The girl reached out, but Scott was faster. He grabbed the cold weapon and plunged it into his fiancée's neck. However, even after all these injuries, Terri was alive. The blow to the neck paralyzed her, completely depriving her of the ability to defend herself. Keefe realized that there was no turning back, so he pulled out an empty bag from the trash can in the kitchen and wrapped it around Terri's head. Then he tried to cover his tracks, deciding to stage a banal robbery. He took $2,500 from the office and got out of the restaurant through the back door window, and in the morning, he pretended to be a worried fiancé and managed to escape justice. But all these years, He could not forget Terri's eyes begging him for mercy. In February 1999, Scott Keefe was arrested on suspicion of killing Terri Brooks. This happened on the 15th anniversary of her death. He fully admitted his guilt, and in 2000 was sentenced to life imprisonment. After a decade and a half, Terri's family received the answers and closure that they had been waiting for so long. But it was a shock for them to learn that it was Scott, who was always considered a good and sincere guy, who took the life of their Terri. On March 12, 2011, at 8 a.m., Rachel Ordley, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at work to open the store as she did every day. When she noticed the door was open, she assumed it was the negligence of the person responsible for closing the store the night before. When Rachel entered, the lights were off and clothes and accessories were lying everywhere. When she saw this picture, she realized that the store had been robbed, so she screamed and asked if anyone was there, to which she heard a groan that startled her and she rushed outside to call the police. Next door to Lululemon was an Apple store that didn't open until 10 a.m., but there was a man named Ryan Hogg standing outside waiting. Rachel asked him if he could escort her to Lululemon, to which Ryan agreed without knowing the context of the request. The day before, the second-generation iPad tablets were unveiled. So, according to Ryan, he waited for the Apple store to open so he could purchase one of those products. As they entered Lululemon, Rachel asked the man to go to the back of the store to see where the groaning she had heard earlier was coming from. Ryan walked into the back room, saw a body lying face down in a pool of blood, and yelled to the manager to call the police as it appeared there was a dead body of a man. As the man was leaving the back room, he noticed another woman there with her hands tied. She appeared to be unconscious, but it was apparent that she was breathing. Ryan told Rachel about the lifeless body and the still living woman lying there, and that it looked like they had both been abused. At this point, the manager made a second call to the police. Officers quickly arrived on the scene. It was about 8:20 when they saw the horrific scene. The store had apparently been robbed. One of the women was lying dead in a pool of blood and completely bruised, while the other was alive but unresponsive, bound with duct tape and wounded in the face. They were Lululemon employees Jana Murray, the dead woman, and Brittany Norwood, the survivor of the attack, both of whom worked the evening shift and closed around 10 p.m., meaning just before closing time. Someone came in and attacked the women. He was still unclear if it was robbery or revenge, or if Jana was trying to protect the store so she was killed, while Brittany may have complied with the perpetrator's demands and survived. Brittany Norwood was taken on a stretcher to a suburban hospital so they could treat her wounds and see if she needed to be hospitalized. At this point, they did not yet know how serious her injuries were. There were visible lacerations on her chest, legs, arms, and forehead, but the most striking one was a 5-centimeter cut on the victim's right thumb, possibly sustained while trying to defend herself when she was attacked with a knife. Jana Murray's lifeless body was taken to the forensic morgue where an autopsy was performed. The result was unexpected as the attack was brutal, with more serious injuries than her partner's, suggesting that she may have actually attempted to confront the robber, or there was a possibility that Jana was the reason the man came to the premises to directly kill her. The autopsy showed that there were a total of 330 wounds on Jana Murray's body, which means that the attack was extremely violent, which usually implies that it was motivated by anger. From the number of wounds inflicted, it can be inferred that this could have been a very personal attack by someone who hated her. At the crime scene, forensic investigators also found one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case, a bloody print from a size 46 Reebok athletic shoe. They concluded that it was left by the man who committed the attacks. Both female victims of the attacks had athletic backgrounds. Jana Murray was born in Houston, Texas on November 22, 1980. She was 30 years old at the time of the murder. Her family consisted of her parents, David and Phyllis, herself and 2 other siblings. Everyone said she was a very positive woman. Jana also traveled all over the world. In particular, she even traveled to China to study. There, she took the opportunity to travel around Asia and also traveled to Japan. And one of her hobbies was keeping healthy by practicing sports and yoga in particular. On her last birthday, when she turned 30, Jana filmed herself bungee jumping. This also shows that she was an open and smiling woman, and her fanaticism for sports was evident from a very young age. Jana was involved in all kinds of sports and dance. She studied ballet, jazz, tap, volleyball, and more. Some details of her life also include a passion for Mexican food. Moreover, on each of Jana's birthdays, her family goes to her favorite Mexican restaurant to reminisce. And the truth is that everyone in her life says only good things about her. No one understood why Jana was hurt, why she was killed. Investigators questioned everyone, even her boyfriend, whom she was about to marry. But no one had a motive. Apparently, Jana had no enemies. But someone secretly still hated her. After graduating from college, the girl went to live in Arlington, Virginia, to pursue higher education at Johns Hopkins University. It was during this time that Jana went to the Lululemon store in that city to find a job, but the store told her that they were not looking for salesmen, but that the Montgomery County store in Bethesda, Maryland was hiring. The Maryland store was a half-hour away, but she didn't want to pass up the opportunity because she loved the brand. Jana sent in her resume and was hired a few days later. She got the position not only because of her knowledge of yoga, but also because of her charisma. Jana became one of Lululemon's top salespeople. Unlike Jana, Brittany, who was the second victim of the attack, had a somewhat more complicated life. Born into a poor family with 8 siblings, Brittany Norwood didn't have many reasons to smile. In her own words, she and her family were constantly plagued by racism. Despite this, her classmates noted that she never lost her temper and was a lot of fun. In this, she was helped by sports, in particular soccer, because Brittany played it in her high school and became one of the star players in the sport in her neighborhood. Soccer then earned her a scholarship to attend New York University. Her dream was to play soccer as a member of the official U.S. women's national team and to compete in some sort of World Cup. Unfortunately, lack of money and opportunity interrupted that dream. Brittany studied sociology at the university in New York, where she had a scholarship, but then moved to Arlington, Virginia, where she had 2 jobs, at a hotel and at the Lululemon store. However, she was reportedly transferred to the Montgomery County store shortly before the attack. Both women lived in the city of Arlington at the time of the attack and led different lives but had a similar passion for sports. They could have been targeted by a criminal who pursued them with the intent to harm. Sadly, one of them died, but at least one woman survived, possibly to bring justice to her partner. The first details recovered from the crime scene included a bloody footprint of a man and a knife, which was the primary weapon used in the attack, though investigators note that several items from the store were used to inflict all of the wounds on Jana's body. In addition, 3 wads of money were missing from the safe. It should also not be overlooked that the woman survived the attack. Brittany Norwood's story could explain how everything happened and who was responsible for what happened. At the very least, the description could lead police to a clue. The robbery indicated that it could have been the primary motive, but the number of injuries was not consistent with the way robberies are usually carried out. In most cases, robbers do not intend to kill unless they are faced with the need to do so when they may be discovered or the person is unwilling to comply. Also, these murders usually happen quickly, usually with a firearm. But the attack on Jana was done with a knife and the person took time to torture her. On March 12th at 2:35 p.m., Brittany Norwood was first interviewed at Suburban Hospital. She said that the attack was not carried out by one person, but that 2 masked men entered the premises. One of them took care of Jane and the other attacked her. According to her version, she was abused with a hanger. Brittany was unable to elaborate further on what happened because she was under sedation. Officers agreed to interview her again in the coming days if she recalled anything else. That same day, investigators interviewed employees at the neighboring Apple store, which was open until 11 p.m. Then, knowing that the attacks must have happened around that time, they asked if anyone had seen anything. Then the first witness came forward who had only heard voices. This person said he heard 2 female voices. One of them was shouting, "Talk to me, don't do this, tell me what's going on." And the other female voice was saying, "Oh my God, help me, please help me." Then all he heard was screams and moans, and when it subsided, the man noted that he heard the sound of someone dragging something. Despite this, the witness, an Apple employee, surprisingly did not call the police. He simply reported the matter to a security guard who went to check the Lululemon store. He looked out the window and noted that there was nothing strange and returned to the store. This employee also said that he later reported this fact to the manager of the Apple store and that he left work around 11 p.m., at which time there was no more noise. Detectives on the case went to Brittany Norwood's home to see if she remembered anything else about the incident. When they entered the home, the woman, still in some pain, invited them into the living room to talk. There she was asked if she remembered anything else from the past 2 days to try to identify the 2 men she mentioned. Brittany then attempted to explain how the events had transpired. She said that when the 2 men entered the room, one of them headed straight for her and the other grabbed Jana. Brittany described her attackers as white males wearing ski masks and determined from their voices that they were anywhere from 25 to 27 years old. She noted that her attacker was approximately 165 centimeters tall and Jana's attacker was slightly taller at approximately 180 centimeters. They were dressed in black and wore gloves. Brittany also said that after her partner was killed, her attacker went to rob a store and the other began to abuse her. When she began to talk about Jana's murder and abuse, she began to cry. Brittany had obviously been through something traumatic. But investigators needed to get as much information as possible because she was the only survivor and the only eyewitness at the scene. Brittany also noted that the man told her that your name is Brittany and you live on so-and-so street, which scared her even more. But she also told investigators that she thought the perpetrators probably saw 2 bills in her wallet during the robbery for internet and gasoline that had her name and address on them, which she said were stolen. Another detail that Brittany mentioned is that her attacker, while taunting her, started insulting her and even made racist remarks. And after the abuse, the man pushed her on top of Jana's body, which was lifeless by then. Detectives asked Brittany if her family was supportive, to which she said yes, that she had conversations with her family about moving back to Seattle to be safe, but mentioned that she had recently started a new job in Bethesda and was looking forward to starting work once she recovered from her injuries. Because the attackers knew Brittany's address, detectives gave her a direct contact in case any of them showed up at her home. But in analyzing the evidence they received, detectives discovered something new, something that didn't make sense. Among that evidence was a medical report that caught their attention. It said that Brittany Norwood had not been abused, and it described the injuries found on her body, some on her arms and some on her legs. But most notable were a cut on her forehead, a scratch on her back, and a 5-centimeter cut on her right thumb. Compared to the wounds that had been inflicted on Jana, what they had done to Brittany was almost nothing. But why would she lie about the violence? On the other hand, another witness came forward. Brittany and Jana's boss recalled the situation that happened the night of the attack. She said that around 10 p.m., she received a call from Brittany saying she had forgotten her wallet at the store and asked her to contact Jana to come back and open the door for her. It was Jana who locked the store every night, and she was the only one with a key. 4 days after the attack, investigators began to speculate that Brittany might have been hiding something. Thus, she became a person of interest to the investigation. Because Brittany was needed to submit hair and fingerprint samples, the investigators informed her that they needed to meet with her that same day to continue the interview. They never told her that she was a person of interest to the investigation. They only said that the samples were to rule out her presence at the crime scene, which is a routine procedure that is usually followed if a person other than the suspect was at the scene. However, the purpose was clearly to see if they could prove that Brittany actually committed the assault. The investigators also asked her to stay late because they wanted to interview her. And this was very important because this is where they could get inconsistencies in her story, already knowing that she could be a suspect. The interview lasted 2 hours and 55 minutes. The first hour was spent taking samples and the rest of the hour was spent questioning Brittany's testimony. She kept mentioning that the assailants were 2 white males. She was asked if she knew what kind of car her partner was driving, but she said she didn't know. Brittany gave other details, talked about being afraid to face one of them, and cried when she talked about Jane. Investigators released her and asked her to return at 10 a.m. March 18th. Officers were waiting for crucial evidence to make an arrest, and that evidence was surveillance footage from a parking lot near Lululemon, where Brittany was seen alone behind the wheel of the victim's car. The March 18th interrogation, the 4th for Brittany, began normally. She reported that she was excited about the prospect of moving to Seattle to live with her brother Chris, but that her only concern about the move was that she wanted to continue to assist in the investigation. The senior detective then asked Brittany again about Jana's automobile. Again, she replied that she did not know what kind of car her partner drove. The detective then showed her a photograph that showed Brittany parking Jana's car in a parking lot a few blocks away from the scene on the night of the attack. Brittany then said that her assailants had forced her to move her car there and that they had been following her at all times. She further noted that when she arrived at that parking lot, she saw a police car but did not call for help because she allegedly feared for her life. However, she could not be seen at all from the Lululemon store because after 2 blocks she turned right and simply could not be seen, and this is inconsistent with her testimony that she was allegedly followed. The detective then told Brittany that he did not believe her story, that there were inconsistencies in it, and that it was all made up. She was read her rights and arrested on suspicion of Jana Murray's murder. By this time, several pieces of physical evidence had been released. DNA from Jana's fingernails confirmed that the scratch on Brittany's back was inflicted by Jana during the attack, probably in defense. Although not much surveillance footage was found, the ones that were available showed only Brittany, but not the two white-masked men. In addition, the woman was never abused. She withheld details in her testimony and changed many others to make it look like two people committed the assault. The prosecution also had witnesses against Brittany, soccer teammates from a university in New York, who said that Brittany was nice, but she had a little problem. She was a kleptomaniac. She was constantly stealing and as a result was expelled from the university and lost her scholarship. It was also proven that the wound on her right thumb was inflicted when she attacked Jana. It was also found that she had tied her own hands to simulate an assault. Several wounds on her body were self-inflicted, and she lied for days to the authorities as well as to her family, who had believed for months that Brittany was innocent. On top of all of this, it was proven that the bloody male footprint found in the store was made by Brittany herself using a sneaker that was later found in the store. The hardest part of the trial was proving why Brittany brutally murdered Jana. What was the motive? 5 items that Brittany allegedly used to inflict the wounds on Jana's body were introduced into evidence: a hammer, a dagger, a clothes hanger, a stick taken from one of the clothes hangers, and a Swiss Army knife. It was proven that the motive was not to steal money, as the money missing from the safe was found hidden in the same room. In October, the trial began. The evidence was so overwhelming that Brittany Norwood pleaded guilty to the crime of self-defense and claimed that the attack occurred after Jana said mean things to her and attacked her first. The trial lasted 6 days and the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. On January 27, 2012, the judge rendered his verdict, sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Clearly, she killed Jana, the evidence proves it, and she partially admitted to killing her, although she claimed it was self-defense. But the question remains, why? Although the prosecution described the attack as revenge for being caught stealing a pair of sweatpants, Brittany never explained the real reason, what happened between them that made the attack so aggressive. Many believe that the true motive was envy. Brittany was jealous of Jana's life, and that perhaps the murder was not because of petty theft, but because Brittany wanted Jana's life, something she could never have due to her poverty. Let's rewind the clock 15 years to March 2009 to examine this case. Southgate, a district situated in North London, is not where our story begins. Instead, it commences in Cottard, a quaint village in Hertfordshire County, approximately 30 miles from the bustling capital. On Sunday, March 22, 2009, a local farmer embarked on his daily work at the family farm. As he drove his tractor around the expansive fields, which required extensive processing due to the vast area of the farmland, he spotted what appeared to be a green sports bag near the main road at the edge of one field. Pressed for time, the landowner made a mental note to return later and investigate the mysterious object. During a break several hours later, the farmer revisited the field's edge, disembarked from his tractor, and approached the green bag. Upon unzipping it, he discovered an item wrapped in a blue plastic bag adorned with a printing motif and secured with tape. Reaching inside, the man prodded the contents with his finger. The object felt soft to the touch, but its identity remained elusive. An unsettling feeling began to grow within him. The bag appeared too new and well-maintained to be carelessly discarded, and the deliberately concealed contents suggested that someone had intentionally disposed of the bag and its contents by tossing it far from the road. Reluctant to unwrap and examine the package's contents, the farmer opted to contact the police and report the unusual find on his property. Shortly after, several officers arrived at the field where the bag was discovered. They scrutinized it from various angles, and one officer reached inside, probing the bundled object. After a brief moment, the officer raised his head to his colleague and expressed his belief that he had felt toes. The bag, it turned out, contained a severed human leg. However, the whereabouts of the person to whom it belonged remained a mystery. Had they sustained an injury, or had their life been tragically cut short? The area surrounding the leg's discovery was swiftly cordoned off to preserve the crime scene from potential contamination by passers-by. However, no additional evidence was uncovered at the site. The severed limb was promptly transported to the morgue for further analysis. Upon examination, the forensic expert concluded that the leg belonged to an adult, likely a male, based on its size. The presence of a characteristic reddish rash on the skin indicative of eczema, provided insight into the victim's medical condition. Beyond this, little could be discerned about the owner of the dismembered limb at the time. The expert noted, however, that the amputation was executed with remarkable precision, suggesting the involvement of someone with extensive knowledge of anatomy. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a medical amputation, given the clean and precise nature of the cut. They speculated that the leg might have been stolen from a hospital for unknown reasons and subsequently discarded in the field. Further analysis, however, revealed that while the amputation was not strictly medical, it was performed by someone with a deft hand and prior experience wielding a blade, hinting at a professional or near-professional level of skill. This revelation offered the police a potential lead, suggesting the involvement of a doctor, butcher, or someone with a profession that required a deep understanding of anatomy. If the leg had not been pilfered from a hospital, it implied that an individual had suffered an injury, likely the result of a criminal act. The primary objective for law enforcement was to establish the identity of the leg's owner, a task that proved exceedingly challenging. The DNA profile extracted from the limb was cross-referenced with the national database, but no matches were found, indicating that the victim had no prior criminal history. This avenue of investigation reached a dead end, as no missing persons reports had been filed in the vicinity. The absence of hands for fingerprinting or a face for photographs and flyers left the police with little to work with beyond the solitary left leg. Despite the paucity of evidence, the case was not relegated to the Unsolved Crimes archive. Merely a week later, on March 29, 2009, a couple walking their dog stumbled upon a left forearm on the roadside near another village in Hertfordshire, approximately 25 miles from the initial discovery. The police were summoned once more, and law enforcement officials immediately suspected that the forearm belonged to the same individual whose leg had been found by the farmer. DNA analysis confirmed this suspicion, but the ham separation from the forearm eliminated any potential clues to the victim's identity. The perpetrator's efforts to conceal the victim's name were evident. Like the leg, the arm was meticulously severed, showcasing a similar level of precision. News of these grisly discoveries spread rapidly, garnering significant media attention due to the rarity of such incidents in rural areas. Severed limbs were not commonplace on the side of the road, and the story's resemblance to a horror film piqued public interest. Detectives hoped the increased visibility would expedite the victim's identification, but the remote location yielded no witnesses. The tranquil country roads were seldom frequented by motorists or pedestrians. Residents of nearby villages were left with a plethora of questions. Who did the body parts belong to? How did they end up in this peaceful area? Where was the rest of the remains? However, the community had little time to speculate, as a third body fragment was soon discovered, followed by a fourth and a fifth. Over the ensuing weeks, several more parts were found scattered across different locations. The police found themselves in the macabre position of piecing together a puzzle composed of a deceased person's remains, a task as repugnant as it was challenging. On March 31, 2009, yet another grim discovery was made in a different village. As a local farmer meticulously inspected his cattle pen, he stumbled upon a severed head, callously discarded in the field without any attempt at concealment or wrapping. DNA analysis confirmed that the skull belonged to the same individual as the previously discovered arm and leg. The perpetrator's signature neat cut was evident once more, but this time, their determination to prevent the victim's identification became even more apparent. The face had been brutally disfigured, with the nose, ears, tongue, and eyes removed, and the skin and flesh painstakingly stripped away. However, the criminal made a critical oversight in their zealous efforts to render the face unrecognizable. They neglected to consider the teeth, which could provide the police with a significant lead in identifying the victim. This misstep was a glaring error on the part of the perpetrator, as dental records are frequently utilized in investigations to establish the identity of the deceased. The fourth body part, the victim's right leg, was unearthed on April 7th. Mirroring the left leg's discovery, it was swathed in blue plastic, fastened with tape, and placed inside a bag before being abandoned near a bypass road. The news of this latest finding spread rapidly, fueling public horror and anticipation regarding the location and timing of the next gruesome discovery. The criminal's actions seemed to mock law enforcement, akin to playing a twisted game. The media dubbed the perpetrator the Jigsaw Killer, as each recovered body part represented another piece of the macabre puzzle that the police needed to assemble to identify the victim and apprehend the culprit. Within a mere 4 days, the investigation gained momentum as new evidence emerged, shedding light on the victim's cause of death. On April 11, 2009, a green suitcase bearing the same brand as the previously found duffel bag was discovered in a ditch. Inside, investigators found the right forearm, the upper portion of the left arm, and a male torso. The torso proved pivotal in determining the cause of death, revealing 2 stab wounds to the back that had punctured the lung. The knife used in the attack had a blade approximately 4 inches in length. This discovery confirmed that the killing was intentional, as the wounds were inflicted from behind. The absence of defensive wounds on the body part suggested that the victim did not engage in a struggle for his life. It is possible that he was unaware of the impending danger, depriving him of the opportunity to fight back. The investigation proceeded on multiple fronts simultaneously. First, a CT scan of the skull was sent to facial recognition experts in the hope that they could reconstruct an image of the victim's appearance when alive. The goal was to release this image to the public to aid in identification. Second, the bags, suitcases, and cases where the body parts were discovered underwent forensic examination. However, the absence of fingerprints on the items themselves greatly disappointed the investigators, suggesting that the perpetrator had worn gloves and possessed a keen understanding of forensic techniques. Despite this setback, a small clue emerged. Upon closer inspection, experts detected minuscule blue and green fibers on the tape. Microscopic analysis revealed that the blue threads had a fuzzy texture, reminiscent of peach fuzz, indicating something soft and fluffy. The experts advised the detectives to be attentive to blue items if they identified a suspect and entered their home. This would allow the experts to compare the fibers and definitively establish a connection to the evidence. While this information did not provide immediate leads, it held the potential to play a pivotal role in the future. Concurrently, authorities searched for missing persons who matched the victim's profile. Based on the recovered body parts, they estimated that the victim was either European, Asian, or of mixed ancestry, with a short stature and a rather large build. The age range was approximated to be between 40 and 60 years old. All recently disappeared individuals fitting this profile were scrutinized. Moreover, the police appealed to the public for any relevant information. Officers diligently responded to and investigated various leads and theories provided by local residents. Amidst a plethora of unhelpful calls, a breakthrough emerged in the form of an oral report of a missing person. Just days after the most recent discovery in mid-April, a man approached the police after seeing a public appeal on television and in the media about the unidentified crime victim. He believed that the profile matched his missing brother, Jeffrey Howe, who was 49 years old at the time of his disappearance. Born in 1960, Jeffrey Howe had recently resided in the Southgate area of North London, where he owned an apartment. He worked as a sales manager at a kitchenware store and had been married a couple of times before, but by the spring of 2009, he was divorced. Described as a calm and hard-working individual, Jeffrey had invested significant effort into becoming one of the best employees at his store, earning high regard from his colleagues. Outside of work, Jeffrey was an avid football fan, supporting the Manchester United team. His brother portrayed him as a charming, cheerful person with a heart of gold, capable of getting along with anyone. While not perfect, having had a couple of minor disputes with neighbors in his apartment building, the majority of people who knew Jeffrey spoke positively about him. His sudden disappearance came as a shock to many who knew him. Jeffrey's disappearance in mid-March 2009, just weeks before the first body part was discovered, drew the attention of the police following the report from his brother. The missing man's profile closely matched that of the victim: middle-aged, similar height and build, and also suffering from eczema. Moreover, experts found that photographs of Jeffrey's face seemed to correspond with the proportions of the recovered skull. While this appeared to be a promising lead, official confirmation was necessary to conclusively identify the victim as Jeffrey Howe. Due to Jeffrey's adoption as a child, DNA comparison with his parents or other relatives was not possible. However, dental records proved invaluable in this situation. A few weeks into the investigation, it was officially established that the crime victim whose body parts had been scattered throughout the district was indeed 49-year-old Jeffrey Howe. With this confirmation, the police could proceed with their investigation. The authorities now focused on determining who might have had a motive to want Jeffrey dead. To uncover the truth, detectives delved deeper into the victim's personal life. Through conversations with neighbors and Jeffrey's brother, it was revealed that as of March 2009, Jeffrey was not living alone in his apartment. He had two tenants residing with him, a couple named Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush. Stephen, aged around 38, and Sarah only 20, were in a relationship despite their significant age difference. Their relationship had begun in a rather ordinary manner. Sarah had previously provided intimate services, and Stephen had been one of her clients, paying her in cash until they started dating regularly. Stephen and Jeffrey had become close friends while working together at the same kitchenware store. Prior to this, Stephen had already held several jobs, including working as a get collector, a personal trainer, and even running his own gym before finding himself at the store. The two men often spent time together after their shifts, drinking and attending football matches. At one point, Stephen faced financial hardships and found himself temporarily without a place to live. Jeffrey, known for his kind nature, offered his friend and his girlfriend Sarah a place to stay in his apartment for a nominal fee until Stephen could get back on his feet. Stephen and Sarah had moved into Jeffrey's apartment approximately 5 months before his disappearance. They had taken up residence in November 2008 and had been living there ever since. The mention of tenant Stephen Marshall's name immediately raised suspicions among the detectives. Marshall's criminal history, primarily involving prohibited substances and an assault with a firearm, painted him as an individual capable of committing such a heinous crime in the eyes of experienced investigators. On April 21, 2009, detectives visited Jeffrey Howe's former apartment in Southgate. The tenants, Stephen and Sarah, greeted them warmly and agreed to cooperate with the police. When questioned about Jeffrey's disappearance, the couple claimed to have limited knowledge, stating that they hadn't seen Jeffrey since around February. Stephen explained that Jeffrey had been experiencing financial difficulties and personal problems shortly before his disappearance. According to Stephen, Jeffrey had become withdrawn and preoccupied, but had not shared the details of his struggles with his tenants. Based on their account, it appeared that Jeffrey had left voluntarily due to his hardships, without disclosing his destination or maintaining contact. Stephen and Sarah claimed to be unaware of his current whereabouts. However, the police found their story suspicious, as it contained inconsistencies. Initially, Stephen asserted that he and Jeffrey were best friends, but moments later he insisted that he had no knowledge of Jeffrey's whereabouts and hadn't heard from him in months. The situation seemed odd. A friend had allowed them to live with him, then vanished without a trace, and they continued to enjoy his hospitality without concern or attempts to locate him. Stephen's demeanor suggested a lack of concern for Jeffrey's well-being, raising questions about whether it was merely a lack of empathy or if Stephen knew that his friend was no longer alive. During a brief inspection of the premises, the police noticed additional alarming signs. In Jeffrey's bedroom, they discovered a personalized license plate from his car, which had been removed for unknown reasons. The vehicle itself was nowhere to be found. If Jeffrey had left in his car, there would be no reason to remove the plates, as it would be illegal and likely to attract attention from law enforcement. Another suspicious detail was the absence of a bed in the owner's bedroom, replaced by an inflatable mattress and 2 blue inflatable pillows on the floor. The detectives speculated that if Stephen and Sarah had disposed of the owner's bed and mattress, They might have been trying to conceal evidence of a crime that had occurred in the apartment. Given the tenant's strange behavior and these concerning observations, the officers made the risky decision to arrest the couple pending further clarification of the case. The risk stemmed from the fact that at the time of Stephen and Sarah's arrest, there was no official confirmation that the victim was indeed Jeffrey Howe. The identification had been made through dental records, despite the perpetrator's efforts to prevent recognition. The investigators now had to await the expert report to proceed with their case against the suspects. The police found themselves in a precarious situation, lacking concrete evidence linking Stephen and Sarah to the crime. Keeping them in custody indefinitely would not be feasible, so it was imperative to uncover evidence implicating the tenants in Jeffrey's death, or risk their release. The decision to arrest was made on a hunch, as the detectives sensed that the couple might flee at any moment, potentially evading capture. At the police station, Stephen and Sarah were interrogated separately. Both denied any involvement in Jeffrey's disappearance. Stephen remained uncooperative, answering every question with no comment, even when shown a photograph of Jeffrey and asked if he recognized him. His behavior only heightened suspicions. If Jeffrey was his good friend and Stephen was innocent, why would he refuse to cooperate with the investigation? Sarah, on the other hand, was more forthcoming, but provided no new information, reiterating that Jeffrey had been troubled and left of his own accord. It was evident that neither suspect would be forthcoming, leaving the police with limited time to extract a confession or uncover irrefutable evidence. To the detectives' relief, official confirmation arrived identifying the deceased as Jeffrey Howe. A forensic team was dispatched to search the victim's apartment, suspecting that his death had occurred there. Despite the seemingly clean and tidy appearance, ultraviolet lighting revealed a significant amount of blood under the carpets, floorboards, baseboards, and flooring, particularly in the master bedroom and adjoining bathroom. Analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Jeffrey. The discovery of the evidence led to Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush being charged with Jeffrey Howe's murder. However, the case against them continued to build. The blue and green fibers found on the adhesive tape used to secure the plastic bags containing the victim's remains matched those from the blue inflatable bed in the main bedroom, indicating its presence during the dismemberment. A witness also reported seeing Stephen Marshall carrying a wooden bed out of the apartment and disposing of it in a large dumpster shortly after Jeffrey's disappearance. The green fibers on the tape were traced back to a green polo shirt belonging to Stephen, bearing the logo of a gym he had previously owned. This served as another piece of irrefutable evidence, suggesting that Stephen was either wearing the shirt or had it in the room during the gruesome act. With the mounting evidence against Stephen and Sarah, it was clear that they were responsible for Jeffrey's death. The only remaining question was the motive behind such a heinous crime. The motive behind Jeffrey Howe's murder was shockingly mundane: money and greed. When Stephen and Sarah were facing financial hardship, Jeffrey generously allowed them to stay in a spare room in his apartment until they could regain their footing. He offered to charge them only a portion of the utilities, with rent being essentially symbolic. Jeffrey considered Stephen one of his closest friends and was glad to assist. However, this arrangement soon soured as Jeffrey felt taken advantage of, with the couple failing to uphold their end of the agreement. Stephen was reluctant to pay even the minimal rent, and what Jeffrey had anticipated to be a month or two of accommodation stretched much longer. The tenants made no effort to secure their own housing, content to live carefree at their friend's expense. Frustrated by the constant reminders about unpaid utilities, Jeffrey's relationship with Stephen deteriorated, ultimately ending their friendship. It is likely that the owner eventually asked them to vacate the room and leave the apartment. Angered by this turn of events and determined to continue living at Jeffrey's expense, Stephen and Sarah resorted to the unthinkable: eliminating him. The motive of greed and financial gain was further confirmed by the couple's actions following Jeffrey's murder. Feeling unbridled freedom and impunity, they began stealing from their former friend. They wrote themselves checks from Jeffrey's checkbook, ordered goods online using his bank card, purchased new cell phones, and indulged in takeout food. As the funds on the card dwindled, they started selling Jeffrey's belongings, including his phone, furniture, and TV. Just days after his death, the couple sold Jeffrey's car, listing it online, removing the plates, and providing the buyer with a handwritten receipt. Stephen even went so far as to paste Jeffrey's personalized license plates over his own, fill up his car's tank at a gas station, and flee without paying. During a search of Stephen's car trunk, forensic examination revealed traces of Jeffrey Howe's blood, indicating that Stephen had used his own vehicle to transport the dismembered body parts, likely hoping to evade identification and any connection to them. Cell phone data also placed Stephen and Sarah together in the remote village where Jeffrey's mutilated skull was later discovered. In January 2010, nearly a year after Jeffrey's death, Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush stood trial. Initially pleading not guilty and attempting to shift blame onto each other, Stephen eventually confessed to the crime. Based on cell phone records, Jeffrey's death was presumed to have occurred on the night of March 8, 2009, while Sarah was visiting a friend overnight. Stephen admitted to single-handedly killing Jeffrey, stabbing him twice in the back and leaving his former friend, who had helped him in a time of need, to bleed to death. Stephen also revealed the reason behind the precise dismemberment of the body parts. He had prior experience in this grisly task, having performed at least 4 dismemberments for one of North London's largest crime families. The police confirmed links between Stephen and this criminal organization. It was this expertise that had initially misled the medical examiner and police into suspecting someone with a medical background. Upon pleading guilty, Stephen Marshall received a life sentence with a minimum term of 36 years, eligible for parole no earlier than 2046. Sarah Bush, while cleared of the serious crime, was found to be an accomplice, having tidied the apartment and concealed evidence. She was charged with obstruction of justice and sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. Tragically, Jeffrey Howe's hands and facial fragments were never recovered. Sarah Bush later claimed they were buried in the woods, but she could not recall the exact location. Despite efforts by the police and relatives, the remains of the man who died for his kindness remain lost.